Welcome to Cinemophile, where we bring you the best in independent, documentary, and foreign films, and we talk to the people who made them. I'm your host, Mike Caspar, and you can find out more about the program by going to cinemophilepod.com. Color Congress is an ecosystem builder that is committed to organizations led by people of color that serve nonfiction filmmakers, leaders, and audiences of color across the United States and U.S. islands. We're going to get into a lot of this Color Congress as well as their project Elev8te, which is it's an attempt to get these incredibly creative and informative filmmakers and their films in front of as many people as possible. We are in an age of change, and this is certainly a great way to begin that process of educating people or to reinforce their own perspective on life and the inadequacies and the injustices of life. We're joined today by one of the co-executive directors of Color Congress, and that will be Sonya Childress. Sonya Childress, welcome to Cinemophile.
Thanks so much, Mike. Thanks for having me.
I'm so happy to have you here because this is something that's near and dear to my heart. I cannot tell you how many hundreds of documentary filmmakers and their films that were like the flower that bloomed and no one saw.
Mm.
And it pains me. And anytime I come across people who are interested and involved in trying to expand the universe for these filmmakers and their films, I am very interested in it. Tell me a little bit about Color Congress. Tell us a little bit about this project, Elev8te.
So Color Congress is, as you said, we're an ecosystem builder, which essentially means we sit within an ecosystem of mostly nonprofit organizations that serve documentary filmmaking, but specifically that serve documentary filmmakers of color or bring their work to audiences of color. And we support them by funding some of them. We're a funder to organizations, not to filmmakers or films. We fund organizations. We support those organizations through technical assistance to strengthen their work. And we connect them and bring them together. And sometimes we give them resources so that they can collaborate on interventions and innovations in the documentary field. So we're a membership organization. We offer free membership to any nonprofit organization that serves people of color in documentary film. We have currently a little over 120 organizations that are all based throughout the continental United States and the archipelagos of the Hawaiian Islands, Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, the Northern Mariana Islands, and Alaska. So we have broad reach. And these organizations that we serve are film festivals, they are micro cinemas and nomadic cinemas. They are filmmaker serving organizations that run mentorships and production support. Some of them are funders themselves, like the National Multicultural Alliance, the 5 organizations that were largely funded by Corporation for Public Broadcasting to disseminate funds for productions of documentary work about communities of color. We also have lots of collectives in our membership, like the Brown Girls Doc Mafia, and other collectives of like-minded documentary filmmakers. So we have a really broad swath. We also have a number of youth-serving media organizations, documentary organizations, and some narrative change organizations that use documentary filmmaking to shift narratives on particular issues. So we have a pretty diverse selection of organizations, but what ties them all together is that they all believe in the power of the documentary form, and they want to ensure that that form is accessible to people of color to author their own stories or stories about their communities or stories of interest to them. And they believe that there's a diverse audience for that work. So that's kind of the membership that we serve. And one of the ways that we support their leadership is by offering an annual field building fund. And this is a fund that doesn't go to any one organization in our membership. This is a fund that we offer to our entire membership. And it's usually around $300,000 every year. It's a pot of money that they can determine how it is spent. And the only parameters are that whatever intervention or idea they want to further with this money, it has to benefit the entire membership. And it can either be a reflection of their collective needs or their collective ambitions. And they go through a months-long process to identify what their needs are as individual organizations, and then start to coalesce around what are their collective needs. And then they start to think about what their individual dreams and goals for this documentary sector, the media sector are, and then and they start to align around which of those are really shared goals. And then ultimately they put a couple of ideas on the table, they debate them, they strengthen them, they dissect them, and then ultimately they vote on them and then go through a consent-based process to ensure that everyone is really aligned behind this idea. And so in 2023, our members voted to direct 2 years of that fund, so $600,000 of this field building fund towards marketing intervention. And what they were looking at the time was what we've all seen, which is a distribution landscape that is not necessarily, that's broken in many ways for all filmmakers, but in particular for filmmakers of color who are finding that their films or their audiences or their target audiences are not being quite served by the current distribution mechanisms. And so they wanted to intervene in kind of this distribution landscape. They considered a lot of different ways that they might do that, including creating a streaming platform that would serve the Color Congress membership. They looked, though, and did a kind of a landscape scan and saw that there were a number, even back in 2023, there are many more now, but even back in 2023, there were a number of interventions and folks who were also building streaming platforms to try to address the same issue. They didn't want to jump into that area since it seemed already pretty saturated with new ideas. So they considered, again, what was the real issue around distribution that they wanted to solve? And ultimately, what they coalesced around was that the problem in distribution for filmmakers of color is not a lack of screens, but it is getting their audience to that film. And that's a marketing problem. That's not a distribution problem. That's not it's not a delivery problem. It's a marketing issue. And so if they feel as if the entities that typically do press or marketing for their films are not quite serving them, then possibly this is an area in which they want to intervene. So what we did was we brought on distribution advocates, which sits in our membership. It's a member organization, and it's a collective of really whip smart strategists and veteran distributors. So it's a collective of individuals who come together and are starting to think about distribution, experimentation, and funds. So they're really intervening in this space. And we consulted with them to help to develop the contours for this 2 years of experimentation. And what they determined was that they wanted to look at 8 experiments that were based on challenges that filmmakers of color often face in reaching diverse audiences. And so they wanted to test 8 different hypotheses. Can I walk you through them?
Tell people the website. So if people are hearing what you're saying and they're interested, where can we send them before we?
So the case studies, the final case studies for all of these 8 experiments can be found in a free downloadable PDF on colorcongress.org/Elev8docs. And Elev8 is ELEV8, number 8, DOCS. So Elev8 docs, the 8 is because we have 8 experiments that we were working on. And I'm happy to kind of double click on any one of these, but the 8 hypotheses are really not necessarily specific to what only filmmakers of color face, but certainly are challenges for filmmakers of color. They wanted to ask the question of, can culturally resonant digital ads drive new viewers to archival films? And the question that we're looking at there is, we tend to put marketing dollars behind new releases. What happens if we put marketing dollars through digital marketing, so on social media platforms, and try to drive interest in an archival film, not a new release, but can we use the kind of tactics that we typically employ for new releases and for an archival film? How would people respond? Would people click on that ad? If they clicked on the ad, would they actually and go to a film page where they can watch the film for free? Will they watch that older film? Sight unseen, maybe not knowing the filmmaker, maybe not have ever hearing of the film, maybe not knowing much about the subject matter. Would they click on an ad? would they watch any part of that film? And the idea again was these are typical digital marketing tactics that one would employ for a new film. Could it work for an archival film? The other question was how can creative digital marketing strategies, really similar, entice young audiences to short films? And here we were trying to figure out, is there an appetite among young people for documentary work? In particular, documentary work by documentary filmmakers of color who are young themselves. So not necessarily artists, adult filmmakers or older filmmakers or well-known documentary filmmakers, but would young people watch documentary films if it was brought to them and made aware to them on the places in which they already are looking for content, which is TikTok. So we ran TikTok ads and worked with influencers and content creators to talk about films, documentary films that were directed by young filmmakers, and try to see whether or not those followers of those influencers and content creators would be interested and enticed to learn more about those films, go to a site and actually watch those films for free. Would they watch the entire films? These were the questions we were testing.
Okay.
We were also testing a question around the argument that many make that the only way to generate substantial press for a new film is by being selected by an A-list film festival. And that's kind of your ticket to press coverage and visibility for a new release. And so we wanted to test, could we take a different route and employ a same-day multi-city premiere strategy as a way to generate visibility and press coverage for a film that is not getting selected for an A-list quote-unquote film festival. So we tried that. We tested our membership and tested whether or not our membership of organizations, many of which are exhibitors themselves, could they coalesce into an exhibition network for independent film? Could they work together and both curate a series of films and then run those films and screen those films throughout their various exhibition spaces, even if they had not put any resources into those films? Those films may not have spoken to the particular identity-based audience that those organizations serve. Would they still run one another's films? And would their audiences come to those screenings? So that was another test. We tested whether or not a public media organization could leverage a national broadcast premiere to help filmmakers reach their target audiences. And with that one, we were working with AmDoc POV on the Documentary Film Union, which we famously know. It had an amazing festival run, but was not picked up by a commercial distributor, largely because of the political content of the film, but was slated to lead POV's season in 2025. And so we were looking to see whether or not public media, what's the extent to which public media can expand an audience for a film that may not be viable in the commercial marketplace. We tested the educational distribution marketplace, and we looked to see, could a DIY marketing effort drive educational sales for an older film? For a filmmaker who has not placed their film in an educational distribution, could someone who has an older film who believes that there's still value in that film, possibly in the educational market, could they go it alone and try to reach out to educators themselves, sell their film directly? What would that look like? Is that possible? The last two experiments were really trying to, again, think about older films and the archives. This next one was about a retrospective. And we were hoping to see, could a retrospective establish a mid-career filmmaker and their body of work essential to the film canon? And if so, can a community-based organization run that retrospective and still give the filmmaker the kind of career validation that they're seeking and visibility for their body of work? Our last eighth experiment asked, can restoring and archiving a beloved archival film create new discourse around that film and those issues? Can it increase and build career validation for the filmmaker? And then could we help secure that film's place within the canon? So it was really around restoring a film, re-releasing that restored film back into the public and seeing how new audiences received that film and responded to that film. And we also looked at the work of archiving an older work and the political nuances of that. So these are the 8 experiments that we ran, and we ran them all across 2025 and 1 month into 2026.
That is very ambitious, and I'm sure to varying degrees of success. These are beginning to coalesce around an approach or a many or multifaceted approach to getting films and filmmakers engaged with the public in a way that's significant. That is why they do what they do. I constantly say the same thing about documentary filmmakers. They're an amazing breed of people in that they trust their instincts. No one is telling them that this is a good idea, or very few would tell them it was a good idea to make the film they're making, and yet they persevere. They find these amazing stories to tell that illuminate so much more than just the story that they're telling. And it is truly almost religious in its in their commitment to what they do. And I'm always encouraging people to, if you feel something that strongly, follow your muse. It really is mind-boggling to me on some level that they commit themselves and they turn out these amazing stories and amazing films. So
Agreed.
there's a few of the more than a few of the ideas that you were or the initiatives that you were talking about. They're very interesting to me. I'm curious in terms of, in broadly speaking, as you come through on the other side of once, are you still in the process of sort of correlating and computating all of the information that you've been taking in over the course of this initiative? Where are you in, maybe in broad terms, where do you feel like you are moving forward with these initiatives? And
The 8 experiments ran over 13 months. They all came to completion in January of this year.
okay, okay,
At which point, each experiment we ran for approximately 3 months at a time. So we were running 2 experiments at a time throughout 2025 and into 2026. And so we ran 2 concurrent experiments for about a 3 month window, which, if anything, was a limiting factor of what is possible in that amount of time,
right,
given that
right.
these are marketing experiments. Obviously, more time to market a film, more time to try to reach audiences is going to always glean better results. So that was a limiting factor, which budget, of course, is also always a limiting factor. But we still gleaned a lot of insight into tactics that are either tried and true or really new and creative and innovative that seem to be working. And we learned a lot about barriers that are emerging around censorship that really have to do with not just the economic environment we're in, but the political environment and the ways in which, especially new social media platforms, are creating barriers to promote documentary films that are of subjects that are now considered political, have been politicized, even if those filmmakers didn't view them as political, or even want to market them as political work. So we learned a lot. And at the end of this process, we had worked with an outside evaluator, an organization called Informing Change that does a lot of evaluation work across the documentary sector. And they followed and tracked all 8 of these experiments over the last year, pulled data, SEO data, they pulled screening data, they pulled audience data, they interviewed the filmmakers and the strategists, and they got lots of information and compiled final case studies with all of this information that both interrogated what questions, what were our learning goals, what were our hypotheses that we were trying to track and challenge, what was the data, what were the results, and then what are the learnings of that. These case studies also include budget information. How much did it cost for us to hire these strategists who ran these experiments? How much were the ad buys? How much did it cost to rent the theaters? All of that data is really transparent. And these case studies, which we released 2 weeks ago, now are available for the public, for any filmmaker or any film organization to read and review, to learn what we tried, what we attempted, what we were trying to learn, and what resulted from all of that work.
So they can go to Color Congress and they can download,
They can
check this out.
download. That's exactly right.
Well, there's a couple of things I want to focus on, and that is micro cinemas. I'm
Mhm.
fascinated by the idea. It's kind of a, I don't know that it's fully definable as, but apparently across the country, these smaller storefront sort of theaters are popping up. I don't know how established the networks are among them, if there are sort of a network of micro cinemas, but I have felt since I heard about them And I also spoke with a gentleman who's kind of an organizing entity who where a lot of these micro cinemas go to get their films called AGFA. I don't know if you're
Hmm.
familiar with it. And that is as a testing ground for films. It's sort of as a test audience for films. Because if you're going to a micro cinema, you're probably all in on films. You're
Right.
probably someone who's predisposed to go to see the films and to use them as a way of gauging where and how to market documentaries on a bigger scale, on a more wide distribution. That for me feels like that's a very good place for filmmakers who are trying to figure out how do I market this film. And I don't know if that's something that was explored to what degree it wasn't, but it feels like a good testing area for film.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, the one experiment that aimed to kind of activate and mobilize our membership was an experiment that a slate of films that we called Resistance and Joy. And this was a slate of
Was that drowned? Was that drowned land? Was that
no,
one?
Drowned Land. The Drowned Land experiment was around the same day multi-city
Okay.
festival and community screening premiere.
Wonderful documentary, by the
It's a
way.
beautiful film. So this Resistance and Joy was a slate of 12 short films that were put into two different slates. These were all films, all of the films in Elevate docs were nominated by our member organizations. They had to be directed by a filmmaker of color and had to have had some kind of support by one or more of the member organizations. But the 12 films that were nominated for Resistance and Joy were curated by, both nominated by our members, curated by a committee of our members. They put them into these two slates, and then they named the slate Resistance and Joy. And these were films that looked at issues of cultural preservation and identity. There were a lot of LGBTQ rights and intergenerational healing stories. And they felt as if the broad theme and the kind of emotional takeaway of watching this hour of two slates of short docs was this sense of community resistance, but also community joy. So Resistance and Joy was the name of that slate. We pulled that slate together. We built that on Kinema, and we worked with Kinema platform to
Mhm.
disseminate that work. And then we made those two strands available to all of our members. And we asked all of our members, which of you would like to screen this work? Out of a membership of, at that time, I think was 115 or so organizations, 90 member organizations said they wanted to screen the films, which was remarkable. Not all 90 of those organizations have brick and mortar screens, let alone, whether those are formal screening rooms or micro cinemas, as you were mentioning, that they all wanted to screen this work. Ultimately, time was a factor, and they didn't all have the kind of time that we had the rights for those films. It didn't work out for all of our members. So ultimately, there were 21 screenings of the films by our member organizations. But what's remarkable about that is that, again, many of the member organizations in our in Color Congress are identity based. They serve a particular
Yeah.
racial or gender identity, and yet they were screening a slate of films that may have been outside of those identities, and then invited their typical audience to come and watch this work and
Yeah.
see these films in conversation with each other and see these stories in conversation with each other. And ultimately, what it felt like was kind of exercise in solidarity, not just curatorial solidarity, but community solidarity. And what we saw in some of our member organizations was that, a Latinx organization in San Antonio told us that for the very first time, they had Black audience members come to their screening because of one film in that slate that they wanted to see. And they watched the whole slate, and they had never been to one of their events before. So they were seeing that this kind of cross-pollination of
Yeah.
communities were coming. And these were not large, some of the member organizations rented big screening rooms for these events, and many of them held them in kind of micro cinemas. And what we were seeing is that there is a real desire. I'm not sure if it's just that micro cinemas are playing a particular role, but I think what we learned from Resistance and Joy and from some of the other screenings is that communities in this moment want to be in person, and that they want to watch nonfiction film. They want to watch documentary film in person.
Yeah.
Some of it is because we are being live streamed to genocide on our social media platforms, and it's a lot for people. And if they are going to have to kind of voluntarily watch something that might be also challenging, they don't want to do it in isolation in their living rooms. They want to do it in community. But also, if there's something that might deliver a sense of joy, not just resistance, they also want to do that in community. They want to feel that in community. I think you're onto something about microcinemas, and more importantly, I think we're onto something about in-person screenings. This is a moment in which in-person spaces are holding a really important role, and that what microcinemas do is develop a relationship with community and audience over time, and so that they become trusted conveners. So it doesn't matter if you know who the filmmaker is or you've ever heard of that film. You trust that organization will have a good curation, that you'll go to that event, you'll go to that screening, and you'll be in conversation with people who may have similar values or similar interests as you.
Absolutely. I want to underscore this part of the conversation. I do believe that people are eager to get out and share community right now, especially now. It feels like a moment. And I think going to a theater is a safe community engagement and getting to know people. So I really think that what you're talking about is relevant and something that it's more than relevant. I think it's imperative that we are moving in those spaces and moving in those directions. I applaud you on your work and Color Congress and what you're doing. Based on our conversation before we got started, I think there are a lot of areas here where I believe you're on the right track, and some of the things I would love to continue this conversation offline, because I do think we're moving that space as well. So I'm so appreciative of your time and getting an opportunity to meet you. Again, we've been speaking with Sonya Childress. She is co-executive director of Color Congress along with Sahar Driver. Thank you. Thank you so much for a very in-depth and engaging conversation about this. And I look forward to more. I hope you come back.
Thank you, Mike. Really appreciate it.
You have been listening to Cinemaphile with Mike Kaspar, the place where you will hear from the best in independent documentary and foreign filmmakers. Please check out our previous interviews as well as upcoming interviews and special programming by going to cinemaphilepod.com. We are also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, searchable under Cinemaphile with Mike Kaspar. Until next time, thank you for listening.